There is a kind of quiet that lands on a company right before it is asked to do something it will not all walk away from. I have felt it 4 times now. The first 3 I did not have the sense to name it. The fourth was in the kettle, on Anselm's Reach, under a flat gray sky that never once in 9 days decided whether it wanted to rain, and it was the 4th time that I finally understood what the quiet was. It was the sound of men being careful with each other. Men who a week before had been loud, who had ribbed and cursed and stolen each other's rations, going soft-voiced and gentle, saying please and thank you over small things, as if they already knew the ledger was open and they wanted their last entries to be clean. I was a corporal then. Bram Odell, 2nd Section, 3rd Platoon of a landing company. The coalition had folded into a line it did not fully trust us to hold. We were the small allies in that war, the newcomers, the ones the Atari looked at the way you look at a dog that has wandered into a formal room, not with malice exactly, but with the settled certainty that you understand the thing better than it understands itself, and that its presence is a courtesy you are extending rather than a strength you are counting on. Atari were our allies. I want to say that plainly because most of what follows is going to sound like I hated them, and I did not. They were tall and careful, and they moved through the world as though every action had to first be checked against a book none of us could read. They spoke in soft overlapping tones, 2 throats at once, one carrying the words and one carrying, I was told, the degree of certainty behind them. They were good soldiers by their own lights. They did not run when running was smart. They did not stay when staying was foolish. They had a number for everything, and the number was almost always right. That was the trouble with them. Not that their numbers were wrong, that they were right, and they trusted the number more than they trusted the thing the number was standing in for. We shared the kettle with 2 of their sections. The kettle was a shallow bowl of gray grit maybe 400 meters across, ringed on the north by our ridge and on the south by theirs being the gray spur, a long broken shoulder of rock that the hostiles had taken on the 6th day and would not give back. Between our line and the spur ran the open floor of the bowl, and across the middle of that floor ran a stretch of ground. The Atari had a word for that translated, more or less, as the settled distance. Our lot called it the kill lane. It was the band of open where the spur guns had clear sight and clear range, and where anything that moved died on a schedule so reliable you could have set a watch by it. Nobody crossed the kill lane. The Atari had run the geometry and produced a figure. I heard it as 96 in 100, and 96 in 100 is not a chance a careful people take. So the lane sat there, empty, gray, patient, and we all learned to live with the 400 meters between us and the enemy as if it were 400 kilometers. I should tell you about Corrigan, because everything that matters here is about Corrigan and about the horse. Del Corrigan was our platoon sergeant, and he had been a farmer before the war reached far enough back to take farmers. He was not a big man. He had a way of standing that made him seem like part of whatever he was standing next to, a wall, a vehicle, a hill, as if he had grown there and the rest of us were the visitors. He did not raise his voice. In 3 campaigns I never once heard him raise his voice, and I came to understand that this was not gentleness so much as economy. Corrigan did not spend what he did not need to spend. He had buried enough men to know that shouting did not carry across the ground where it counted. And Corrigan had brought his horse to the war. You have to understand how strange this was, even to us. The coalition moved us by lift and drop. There was no logic under which a farm animal from a backwater district on the far side of human space should have ended up on the line at Anselm's Reach. But there are always exceptions carved into any large machine, and the exception that made Maple possible was an old and half-forgotten provision about working animals attached to a specialist role. Corrigan had gotten Maple classified as a low-end recovery animal in terrain unsuited to powered movers, and the truth is that on some of the worlds we fought on, that was not even a lie. A horse can go where a mover bogs. A horse does not throw heat that the enemy can read. A horse is quiet. Maple was an old chestnut mare, gray coming in around the muzzle and over the eyes, with a swayed back from years of honest work, and a temperament that I can only describe as fundamentally unbothered. She was not a war horse out of a painting. She was a farm horse who had grown old pulling and hauling, and standing patiently in the rain, and she had the settled, low-headed calm of an animal that had decided a long time ago that most of what people got excited about was not worth getting excited over. When the guns opened up far off, she would flick an ear. When they opened up close, she would flick both ears and go on cropping at the gray moss that grew in the lee of the ridge. I saw her stand through a bombardment that put half the section flat on their faces in the dirt, and when it lifted, she was exactly where she had been, chewing, looking mildly at the smoke as if it were weather. Corrigan had raised her from a foal. I know this because he told me, in the flat, unadorned way he told anything, one evening in the 9th week of that campaign when we were the last two awake at the ridge line. He had had her mother before her, and her mother's mother before that, all the way back to a horse his own father had kept, and the whole line of them, he said, had lived and died in the same 3 fields, and the only one who had ever left those fields was Maple, because Maple had left them with him. He said this without any weight on it. He was cleaning her hooves at the time, working the grit out with a pick, and she stood with one hind foot cocked and her head down at the level of his shoulder, breathing into his collar. "She thinks it's my fault," he said. "Being out here, she's not wrong." I asked him why he'd brought her then, if he thought it was wrong. He took a while to answer. That was Corrigan. He would let a question sit until it had settled into whatever shape he wanted before he picked it back up. "Because I told her I would," he said finally. "Bring her home when my time's up. Whatever's left of me, she carries it back to the fields, and she gets to be old in the fields, and that's the end of it." He set the foot down and straightened and put his hand flat on her neck, and she leaned into it the way they do, the whole weight of that big patient head coming to rest against him. "You make a thing a promise," he said. "You keep it. Doesn't matter that she can't hold you to it. Matters that you can." I thought it was a strange thing to say about a horse. I want to be honest about that. I was younger then, and I thought a promise was a thing you made to people, and that making one to an animal was a kindness at best and a foolishness at worst. I did not understand yet. I understand now. Corrigan hummed to her. That was the other thing. 6 notes, always the same 6, low in his chest where you could feel it more than hear it, a little rising figure that turned over on itself and came to rest. It was not a song I ever knew, and I asked him once what it was, and he said it was nothing. It was just a thing his father had hummed to the horses at the end of the day to bring them in, and his father had gotten it from his father, and none of them had ever known where it came from or whether it had words. It was just the notes. Just the 6 notes, older than any of them, a small piece of music that had outlived every mouth that ever carried it and would outlive Corrigan's, and Maple knew it the way she knew his voice, the way she knew his hand. When he hummed it, she would come. From across a paddock, from behind a hedge, from wherever she was, if Corrigan hummed those 6 notes, she would lift her head and come to him at that unhurried walk, no faster for the calling but sure. The Atari did not understand the horse at all. Their section leader was a tall one named, as near as I can render it, Vashon. Vashon was not unkind. I want to be fair to Vashon because of what came later. But Vashon looked at Maple and saw a load-end recovery animal, a piece of equipment with a metabolism, and when he saw Corrigan cleaning her hooves in the evening or standing with his forehead against her neck, he registered it the way you would register a man polishing a rifle he was fond of. A sentimentality. A harmless inefficiency in a creature that was, after all, only a courtesy in the room. Once early on, Vashon came to the ridge while Corrigan was picking Maple's feet and stood watching with that careful stillness they had, and after a while his 2 throats produced a question. He wanted to know the animal's operational value in the recovery role, given the terrain. Corrigan told him she could carry 250 kilos over ground a mover couldn't cross and go quiet and not throw heat. Vashon absorbed this. Then he asked, and I remember the exact translation because it stayed with me. He asked what the animal's replacement cost was, against the strategic value of the ground it could recover. Corrigan set the mare's foot down. He looked at Vashon for a moment. And then he went back to the next foot and he said without heat, "She's not for sale and she's not a number, and if you do the arithmetic on her you'll get it wrong, because you'll be leaving out the part that matters." Vashon filed this away. I could see him file it. It went into the book with everything else, under some heading like human sentiment, operational, and it sat there where it did not interfere with anything, and he went away satisfied that he understood us a little better than before. He did not understand us at all, but that was not his fault exactly. We did not entirely understand ourselves. The line broke on the 14th day. I will not walk you through all of it, because most of it was the ordinary ugliness that battles are made of, and none of it is the part that matters. What matters is that the hostiles came off the gray spur in strength in the gray middle of the afternoon, under that same flat sky, and they came fast and low, and they were among our forward positions before the geometry the Atari trusted so much could produce a number to describe them. We held. That is the plain fact of it, we held, and they broke on us and fell back to the spur, and by the time the light started to go we were more or less where we had been, minus the men it had cost, and the men it had cost were not a small number. Corrigan went out in the counterpush. He should not have been that far forward. A platoon sergeant belongs a step back, holding the shape of the thing. But the shape of the thing had come apart on the left, and Corrigan had gone to put it back together, the way he always did, moving up the line steadying men with a hand on the shoulder and that flat voice, and he had gotten the left put back together, and he had been coming back across the open floor of the kettle when the spur guns found the range again. He went down maybe 60 meters into the kill lane. 60 meters out from our wire, in the open, in the gray, with 340 meters of the enemy's clear sight between him and the spur. I saw it. I want that on the record too, because there is a version of this where I heard about it later, second hand, and that version would be easier to carry. But I saw it. I saw him take the round, you cannot mistake it, the way a man folds, and I saw him go down in the open, and I saw him not get up, and I saw, in the long terrible seconds after, one arm move, just the one arm, lifting a little and settling, lifting and settling, and I understood that Del Corrigan was alive out there in the kill lane, and that he could not move, and that the arm was all he had left to say so. We tried to go to him. Of course we tried. 2 of ours went over the wire before anyone could stop them, and the spur guns cut them down before they had made 20 meters. And after that, a third man got a leg over, and Vashon himself pulled him back down into the trench. Both of Vashon's long arms locked around the man's chest, hauling him back into the dirt while he fought and swore and wept. And then it was quiet in the trench, the careful quiet, and we looked at Vashon. And Vashon looked out at the kill lane, and I watched him do the arithmetic. I will tell you what the arithmetic said, because I heard him say it, in that soft overlapping voice, one throat carrying the words and the other carrying the certainty, and the certainty was total. He said the settled distance could not be crossed. He said the recovery of a single downed soldier across 340 meters of clear enemy sight, against guns of the observed rate and accuracy on the spur, produced a casualty projection that exceeded the value recovered by an order of magnitude. He said that 96 in 100 who entered the lane did not return, and that the soldier in the lane was, by the injury observed and the time already elapsed, a diminishing asset, and that the correct disposition, he used a word that meant something like the honorable settling of an account, was to hold the wire, deny the enemy the ground, and mourn. He was not being cruel. I need you to understand that, because I hated him for about the space of a breath, and then I understood that he was not being cruel, he was being correct, and that the correctness was the worst thing about it. Every figure he gave was true. If we sent men into the lane, most of them would die, and Corrigan would very probably die anyway, and we would have spent good men to buy a body. That was the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was right, and Vashon trusted the arithmetic more than he trusted the thing the arithmetic was standing in for, and so Vashon wrote Del Corrigan off, cleanly, honorably, by the book. He gave the order that no one was to enter the settled distance, and he meant it as a mercy to the living, and by his lights it was one. The arm out in the lane lifted, and settled and lifted and settled. I have thought a great deal since about the difference between us and the Atari, and I have decided it comes down to this. The Atari knew what a man was worth. We never learned. It is our great weakness, and it is the only thing we have ever been better at than anyone, and it is the same thing, and I cannot separate them, and I have stopped trying. The Atari looked at the man in the lane and saw a diminishing asset and a casualty projection and the honorable settling of an account, and every part of that was true, and they were at peace with it. We looked at the man in the lane and we could not make the arithmetic work, not because we couldn't do the sums, but because there was a part of us that refused to accept that the sums were the whole of it, and that part of us was screaming, and it did not have a number, and it would not be quiet. And it was into that quiet, our screaming quiet, and their peaceful one, that the horse came to the wire. Nobody had called her. Corrigan was the one who called her with the 6 notes, and Corrigan was 60 meters out in the lane with an arm that could lift and settle and nothing more. But Maple came to the wire anyway. She came up the gray slope from the picket line at the back where she'd been left, that unhurried walk, no faster for anything. And she came to the wire and put her old gray muzzle over it and looked out at the kill lane, at the small folded shape, 60 meters out with the arm that lifted and settled, and she stood there. She was not agitated. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Every man in that trench was strung so tight you could have played us like wire, and the horse stood at the parapet with her head up and her ears forward, looking out at Corrigan, and she was calm. Not the frozen calm of an animal that doesn't understand. She understood. I would stake my life that she understood. It was the other kind of calm, the kind that comes after the understanding, the kind that has already gotten to the far side of a decision and has nothing left to be afraid of. A young trooper next to me, Halder, he was called, reached up to catch her halter, to pull her back down out of the gun's sight, and Vashon's voice came across the trench, sharp for the first time, sharp in a way I had not heard from him, telling him to leave the animal, that the animal was in the enemy's sight, that Halder was to get down. And Halder got down. And Maple, with no one holding her halter now, turned her head once and looked back down the trench, along the line of our faces, in that mild, unhurried way, as if she were checking something, as if she were counting us and finding us wanting and being kind about it. And then she went over the wire. There was no drama to it. I think that is what none of us were ready for. We were braced for something violent, some breaking loose, and instead the old mare simply picked her way through a low place in the wire the way she'd have picked through a gap in a fence at home, unhurried, deliberate, 1 foot and then the next, and she stepped out onto the open gray floor of the kettle, into the settled distance, into the kill lane, and she began to walk toward Corrigan. I have heard men who were there tell this part, and no 2 of them tell it the same. And I have stopped trying to correct them, because I think the truth of it is too large to fit in one telling. I will tell you what I saw, and you can set it beside the others. I saw an old chestnut mare, gray at the muzzle, sway-backed, walk out into the most dangerous stretch of ground on that world at a pace no faster than she used coming in from a paddock at the end of a day. I saw her cross the first 100 meters into the gun's clear sight without hurrying and without hesitating, her head at its ordinary height, her ears forward, her tail swinging with the walk. And I saw the gray spur, 340 meters off, go quiet. They did not fire on her. I did not understand it then, and I am not sure I understand it now, but I have turned it over enough times to have made a kind of peace with the not understanding. The spur guns had cut down every man who entered that lane on a schedule you could set a watch by. They had killed 2 of ours in 20 meters and would have killed the 3rd. There was no reason on the arithmetic, Vashon's arithmetic, which was right about everything, why they should not have killed the horse. She was slow. She was in the open. She was in their sight the whole way. And they did not fire. I have thought that maybe they could not read her. That the things on the spur, whatever they were, understood a running man, a crawling man, a firing man, and had no place in their own book for a large, calm animal walking toward them at a farmer's pace with nothing hostile in it at all. No threat, no fear, no charge, just an old horse walking, and that they held their fire the way you hold your breath at a thing you cannot categorize. I have thought that maybe it was mercy, that whatever was on that ridge had its own version of the part of us that screams and has no number, and that the sight of the mare walking calm through the killing ground had reached that part of them. I have thought that maybe it was nothing so grand, that maybe by pure chance the guns were shifting or reloading or watching elsewhere for the length of her crossing. I do not know. I will never know. What I know is that the old mare walked the kill lane, and the guns that had killed everything else in it did not touch her, and I have come to believe it was not chance, because chance does not have the shape this had. This had the shape of a thing recognizing another thing. Apex knowing apex. The most careful and lethal presence on that ridge looking out at the calm old animal crossing its ground and understanding, at some level below thought, that it was in the presence of something it had no business firing on. That the calm was not weakness. That the calm was the whole of the message, and the message was, I am not afraid of you, and you will let me pass, and both of us already know it. She reached him. She reached Corrigan, 60 meters out, and she stopped over him, and she lowered that big gray head, and I watched through field glasses now, because Halder had shoved them into my hands, and my hands were not steady but the glasses were good. I watched the old mare put her muzzle down to the folded shape of the man who had raised her from a foal, and I watched the arm that had been lifting and settling come up one more time and take hold of her mane. I do not know how he did it. The medics told us afterward what the wound was, and by that accounting he should not have been able to close a hand, let alone what he did. But I have learned not to trust the accounting where Corrigan and that horse were concerned. He got a hand into her mane and she stood, and this is the part that undoes me still, the part I cannot tell without stopping. She stood, patient, unmoving, the way she had stood through the bombardment that put us all flat, and she let him work. She held herself still against the whole weight of a dying man dragging himself up her side, and she did not shy, and she did not step, and she did not so much as flick an ear, and it must have taken minutes. It must have been the longest minutes of that whole gray day, and the spur watched, and did not fire, and the old mare stood like a thing carved out of the ground and let Del Corrigan pull himself across her back. And then with him on her, draped, more than seated, one hand still knotted in her mane, she turned, unhurried, and she walked back. The same pace. That is what I want you to understand. Not a step faster going back than coming out, though she carried him now, though every meter was a meter closer to safety and further from those guns. The same farmer's walk, 1 foot and then the next, her head at its ordinary height, back across the settled distance that could not be crossed, back through the guns that did not fire, 100 meters and 203, until she came up out of the lane to the low place in the wire where she had gone over, and men who had been ordered not to move were suddenly over the parapet and easing him down off her back and into the trench, and hands were on him, and the medics had him. And the old mare stood at the wire with an empty back and her sides going in and out, and lowered her head, and began to crop at the gray moss in the lee of the parapet, as if she had come in from an ordinary day. Corrigan died 4 hours later, in the aid station at the back of the ridge, with the light long gone and the flat sky finally deciding, too late for any of it to matter, to rain. He did not die in the lane. That is the thing. That is the whole of the thing, and I did not understand why it mattered so much until much later, and now I think it is the only thing that has ever mattered. He did not die alone in the open gray with an arm that could only lift and settle. He died in a dry place with his own people around him and his hand. They told me this. I was still on the line, but they told me, and I believe it, his hand resting on the neck of the old mare, because she would not be moved out of the aid station, and no one had the heart or the standing to make her go. And so she stood over him at the inn the way she had stood over him in the lane, and he had his hand on her, and one of the medics, a quiet woman named Osai, told me that near the end he was humming, just barely, just a thread of it down in his chest where you felt it more than heard it. 6 notes. The little rising figure that turned over on itself and came to rest. The thing his father hummed to bring the horses in, older than any of them, that had outlived every mouth that ever carried it. He was calling her in, and she had already come. I want to tell you the part about Vashon, because I have made it sound as though the story is about the difference between us and the Atari, and about how they were cold and we were warm. And that is not the story, or it is only the surface of it, and the surface is a lie the way surfaces usually are. Vashon came to the picket line the next morning. The rain had passed. The sky was back to its flat gray indecision. I was with the mare, someone had to be, and I had appointed myself, because I could not think what else to do with the thing that was in me, and Maple was standing with her head down, not eating, just standing in the way horses grieve, which is quieter than the way we do it, and I think deeper for the quiet. And Vashon came up the slope, tall and careful, and stood a little way off, and for a long while he did not speak. When he did, both his throats were working, the words and the certainty was not total anymore. That was the thing I noticed. There was a waver in it. The second throat, the one that carried how sure he was not sure. He said, and I am giving you the translation as it came to me, cleaned up only a little. He said that his projection had been correct, that the arithmetic had not been wrong, that 96 in 100 who entered the settled distance did not return, and that this figure was sound, and that he had checked it again in the night and it remained sound. I said nothing. I did not trust myself to say anything. He said that the animal had crossed the settled distance and returned, carrying a load, and that this had occurred, and that he had watched it occur, and that it could not be reconciled with the projection. I said still nothing. And then Vashon said the thing that I have carried out of that war more carefully than anything else I carried out of it. He said that he had been considering, through the night, where the error lay, and that he had concluded that the error was not in the arithmetic. The arithmetic was sound. The error, he said, was that he had believed the arithmetic to be the whole of the account. He had entered the man as an asset and the ground as a value and the projection as a settlement, and he had believed, when he had written the man off, that he had written down everything there was. And he had not. There had been a term he did not know how to enter. Because it had no number, and because it had no number he had left it out, and because he had left it out his account had balanced, and a balanced account had told him to let a man die in the open, and the account had been wrong not in its figures, which were sound, but in its completeness, which was false. He looked at the mare a long time. She did not look back at him. She had never once in all the weeks looked at Vashon the way she looked at Corrigan. "What is the term?" he asked me, and I understood that he was asking in earnest, that he had come up the slope, this careful, lethal, doctrine-bound creature, to ask a corporal of the small allies to name for him the thing that had no number, so that he could enter it, so that his account would never balance falsely again. I did not have a good answer. I have had years to find a better one, and I am not sure I have. What I said, standing there in the gray with my hand on the old mare's neck, was that where I came from we called it a promise. That a man had made one to a horse, that he would bring her home, and that when he could not keep it the horse had kept it for him, had come out into the killing ground to make sure he did not stay there alone, and that this was not in his arithmetic because you cannot put a promise in a column. It is not a quantity. It is a direction. It is the thing that decides which way you walk when the numbers say don't walk at all. I said that we were not better than the Atari at knowing what a man was worth. I said we were worse at it, that we had never learned it, that we could not do the honorable settling of the account because we could not make ourselves believe the account was ever closed, and that this was our great weakness, and that it was the only thing we had ever been better at than anyone, and that they were the same thing. Vashon listened with both throats silent, which I had learned was how they listened when they meant it. And then he took out the device they carried, the one where they kept the book, the running record of everything they understood, checked against everything they had understood before. And he entered something. I do not know what he entered, or under what heading, or whether the word he chose was promise or bond or the untranslatable Atari thing that came closest. I know only that he stood on the gray slope and wrote it down, the term that had no number, so that it would be in the account from then on, so that the next time the arithmetic came out clean and told a careful people to let a man die in the open, there would be one more line in the ledger, one line without a figure beside it, and a careful people would have to look at that blank space where a number should be, and stop, and remember that the account is never as closed as it looks. I brought the mare home. That fell to me in the end because there was no one else, and because I found I could not do otherwise, and because a promise, once you have watched what it costs to keep one, becomes a heavier thing to set down than to carry. It took the better part of a year and more paperwork than the war itself, and I will not bore you with the machinery of it, the exceptions carved into the machine, the provisions about working animals attached to a specialist role, the favors and the forms. What matters is that when I mustered out, I took Maple with me, and I found the district Corrigan had come from on the far side of human space, and I found the 3 fields and the people there, his people, an old aunt and some cousins and a great many neighbors, because it turned out Del Corrigan had been the kind of man a whole district knew, took the old mare back as though she were a piece of their own hearts returned to them, which I suppose she was. She got to be old in the fields. That was the promise in the end, stripped down to its plainest terms, that whatever was left of him, she would carry it home, and she would get to be old in the fields, and that would be the end of it. She carried him further than the fields, it turned out. She carried him out of the killing ground so that he could die among his own, and she carried the memory of him across all that space in the only way a horse can carry a thing, which is not in the mind but in the body, in the way she still lifted her head years later, an old blind mare by then, when someone in the district hummed the 6 notes. Because they all hummed them now, the children hummed them, Corrigan's little rising figure that turned over on itself and came to rest. The thing his father hummed to bring the horses in, older than any of them, and it had not died with Del Corrigan any more than it had died with his father, because that is what that kind of music is for. It is the thing that outlives the mouth that carries it. It is the promise you make to something that cannot hold you to it, kept anyway because you can. She is gone now, the old mare. She went the way the old ones go, quietly in the fields in the summer, and I was there, because I had made a promise too by then, without ever quite saying it aloud, and I have learned that those are the ones that hold hardest. I hummed the 6 notes to her at the end. I am not musical, and I did it badly, and it did not matter at all. She lifted her head, blind and gray and gone almost entirely to bone, and she came the last little way to me at that unhurried walk, no faster for the calling but sure, and she put her old head against my chest the way she used to put it against his, and I stood and let her lean the whole weight of it on me. And I did not do the arithmetic because I have learned better, because there is a term that has no number and I know now where it goes. I think about Vashon sometimes. I do not know if he lived. The war took him or it did not. I lost track of the Atari as you lose track of everyone from that time, the living folding into the ordinary distance, the way the dead fold into the other kind. But I think about the line he wrote down that morning on the gray slope, the term with the blank space where a figure should be, and I like to imagine it is still in the book, that careful lethal doctrine-bound people carrying it forward through their wars, coming to it in the arithmetic and stopping, looking at the blank, remembering. I like to imagine that somewhere out there in the settled distances of other worlds, a careful people who know exactly what a man is worth have learned to leave one line in the ledger empty, on purpose forever, because a small ally taught them once that the account is never closed, and that an old horse walked the killing ground at a farmer's pace to prove it, and that the guns that killed everything else would not touch her, because even the deadliest thing on that ridge understood, at the level below thought, that it was looking at the most dangerous creature in the kettle, and that the most dangerous creature in the kettle was an old chestnut mare, gray at the muzzle, unafraid, keeping a promise a dying man could no longer keep himself. I have kept the 6 notes. I hum them still. My own hands are going gray now, and I do not have a horse any more, and I do not suppose I will get another at my age. But in the evening, out of an old habit I no longer question, I find myself humming that little rising figure that turns over on itself and comes to rest, down in my chest where you feel it more than hear it. And I think of a man cleaning a mare's hooves in the gray light of a bad world a long time ago, saying you make a thing a promise. You keep it. Doesn't matter that it can't hold you to it. Matters that you can. And I think of the arm out in the lane, lifting and settling. And I think of the calm old animal walking out to it, unhurried, sure. And I understand him now, that is all. After all this time, that is the only thing I have to show for it. I understand him now. She came when he called, and when he could not call any more, she came anyway.